Not a girl anymore. That's what he whispered, as he stepped in close, smirking like he was doing her a favor. One blocked the exit, one reached for her belt, and the last one said it flat out, "You won't leave this place a virgin." They didn't see a teammate. They saw an exit wound they wanted to leave their names on. "This is how seals get broken in," one muttered. "Don't worry," another added. "We'll do it. Gently." She didn't scream. She didn't run. She let them circle. And then something happened in that room. Something that left two men crawling, one begging, and all three praying she never says a word. So before we show you how a Navy SEAL recruit turned their favor into a collapse so humiliating they still don't talk about it, smash that like button, tap subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because this story wasn't about what they took. It was about what she took back. She arrived with the wind still biting through her cuffs, boots scuffed, duffel slung, clipboard tight against her ribs like it might explain what her presence didn't. The gate officer hadn't even looked up when he waved her through. No salute, no inspection, just a grunt and a lazy thumb jab toward the admin bay. You'll figure it out. The facility wasn't like the last one. No formal rotation, no field op tension in the air, just rows of bleached trailers, half-dug fighting pits, and a haze of cigarette smoke curling out of a side shed where three men watched her walk by like she was a moving object. Not a person, not hostile, just curious. She didn't give them anything to read, no smile, no twitch, just her stride. Controlled, neutral, unbothered. Inside the holding unit, she was assigned a corner bunk, top rack. No one offered a handshake. The staff sergeant who handed her the key didn't even glance up from his monitor. "Your rotation limbo, 1 week. Maybe 2.
Your TONE goes active next quarter. Translation, you're here, but you don't matter." She nodded once, tucked the key into her hip pocket, and moved past 2 rooms of men, half-dressed, half-bored, half-measuring her with eyes that didn't need to speak to communicate. They didn't flirt. They clocked her, every bit of her, from the soft tension behind her shoulders to the lack of a unit patch on her jacket, from the way she carried her bag instead of dragging it to the silence in her jawline. She was new, young, alone, and more importantly, she was leaving soon. Someone said it low as she passed. "Short timer." It wasn't mocking, it wasn't even cruel. It was identification, a category, a type. Short timer girls weren't staff.
They weren't protected. They weren't dangerous. They were just passing through. She claimed her bunk with precision. Boots squared under the frame, bag nested against the locker, eyes forward. She didn't ask who slept above, didn't unpack, just sat, spine upright, palms flat, gaze loose. She didn't want to join, just blend. But that's the problem with silence in rooms like that. It draws attention. By dinner, the entire East Wing knew 3 things about her. 1, Navy. 2, pipeline complete. 3, barely 20. They didn't need anything else. One of them cracked a joke at Chow. "Bet she hasn't even seen a bar fight." Someone else answered without laughing. "Bet she hasn't even seen a bar." She didn't flinch. That seemed to bother them. And in a place where boredom and testosterone ran neck and neck every hour of the day, a quiet woman in uniform was never just background. She was a trigger waiting to be pulled. They just hadn't decided how. Yet. It happened without ceremony. No isolation, no closed doors, no raised voices, just the wrong conversation at the wrong time. In a place where boredom rotted into curiosity and curiosity curdled into entitlement. It was late afternoon downtime, nothing formal, nothing suspicious. A handful of men lingered near the benches outside the equipment cage, passing a thermos between them, boots off, shirts loosened. The air had that stagnant, post-training stillness to it, where the body's exhausted, but the mind keeps circling. She wasn't part of the group. Not really. She'd stopped only because one of them had asked, casual, neutral, where she was headed next. "Orders say east," she replied, flat, minimal. That should have been it, but someone else followed, voice pitched just low enough to sound harmless. "So, you got anyone waiting on you back home?" She didn't answer at first, not because she was caught off guard, but because she was deciding whether the question deserved oxygen. Finally, she said no. That answer landed differently than they expected. A pause. A look exchanged. One of them smirked, not unkindly. Career first, huh? She nodded once. Discipline matters. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the question shifted. Not louder, not sharper, just closer. So, what about before all this? She turned to face them then. Calm. No tension in her shoulders, no defensive edge. Just honesty. Delivered the way she'd learned to deliver everything else. Clean and unadorned. I'm a virgin, she said, saving myself. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recalculation. Someone let out a laugh, too fast, too loud, the kind of laugh people use to buy themselves time when something doesn't fit the shape they expected. No way, one said. She didn't smile, didn't argue, didn't soften it. I'm serious. Another laugh, this one thinner. Someone shook his head, like he'd just heard a joke that didn't land. You're kidding. I don't kid about things like that. That's when it happened. Not the laughter, but the change. The way their eyes stopped skimming and started measuring. The way bodies shifted, weight redistributing. Like a group that had collectively leaned forward without realizing it. One of them, older, quieter than the rest, tilted his head slightly and said, almost thoughtfully, "That's not how this world works." No anger, no threat, just a statement, like gravity, like physics. The others didn't challenge him. They didn't need to. Because in that moment, something snapped into place between them. An idea so ugly in its simplicity, it didn't need explanation. She wasn't experienced. She wasn't hardened. She hadn't been tested. Which, in their minds, meant she wasn't finished yet. The conversation drifted after that. Not back to normal, but sideways. Jokes resumed, but they weren't aimed at her anymore. They were about concepts, about weakness, about what breaks people. She listened without reacting. She noticed how none of them met her eyes now. Not because they were embarrassed, but because they were already talking past her, deciding things. She excused herself a minute later, citing a gear check. No one stopped her, no one followed. But as she walked away, she felt it, the weight of attention that wasn't pursuit yet, but something worse. Claim. She didn't understand it fully then, just the edge of it. The way her presence now bent the room slightly out of shape. Behind her, one of them muttered, not quite under his breath, "Someone's gonna fix that." Another answered just as quiet, "Yeah, life will." They laughed again. This time, she didn't hear it. But the damage was already done. Because from that moment on, she wasn't just passing through. She was a problem they believed needed solving. She didn't hear the first story they told about her. Didn't catch the second either. But by the third, it didn't matter. Because they weren't stories anymore. They were doctrine. It wasn't just the men from that bench. It never is. It was the next two who overheard the laughter. The one in the corner who saw her walk away. The guy who'd been bored all month and finally had something to sink his teeth into. And suddenly it was a group belief, not a joke. She was a virgin, she said it herself. And worse, she'd said it like it wasn't shameful. Which meant, in their minds, that she was either A, naive, B, lying, C, asking to be set straight. And so the story spread. Not loud, not direct, not actionable, just sideways. She said she's saving herself. She doesn't even know what it's like. Can you imagine making it through buds just to be that? They didn't say it with lust. They said it with mission energy. Like this was a failing that had slipped past inspection. Like she was walking around unvetted. One guy phrased it perfectly, hands behind his head during chow rotation. You don't send someone into war still wrapped in the packaging. Laughter, again, but sharper now, less surprised. They weren't mocking her anymore. They were preparing. The conversations changed around her. At first, they were just quieter. Then they stopped including her at all. inside jokes stacked too fast to follow. Statements with no context. Some people don't get it yet. She'll understand soon. It's better when it's not a choice. She didn't ask questions, didn't adjust her posture, didn't give them a single visible cue that anything had shifted. But she noticed. Her locker had been moved once. Subtle, just 2 inches, but enough to suggest hands had been there. Her PT schedule started overlapping more often with theirs. She stopped hearing her name. Only titles now. The Navy girl. Short timer. Number 20. Like she was a training exercise, not a person. And still, she said nothing. That's what they didn't understand. They thought silence meant they were getting closer. But her silence was distance. It was measurement, patience, timing. While they tried to decide who'd be the one to do the favor, she was already mapping which halls had working exit alarms and which didn't. She started walking the perimeter during downtime, never the center. Always near doors, corners, shadows. She didn't carry a knife. She didn't need one. Because she could hear it now, what they were building together. Not a plan, a philosophy. Virginity wasn't just something she had. It was something she was denying them. And in the culture they'd built for themselves, that was a kind of theft. One night, she caught a phrase that didn't make sense until later. If we don't teach her what it means now, someone else will. And worse? Worse? That was the lie they told themselves. That what they were planning wasn't exploitation. It was protection, correction, training. They believed they were helping her. That was the most dangerous part. The orders came through without drama. No announcement, no briefing, just a quiet update in the system and a folded paper slid across a desk like it wasn't the most important thing in the room. She read it once, then again, reassignment confirmed. Transit window, 24 hours, new unit, new location. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. This place had always been temporary. She'd known that from the moment she stepped through the gate. What she hadn't realized, what she understood now, was how much that mattered to them. Because once the word spread, the air changed. Not all at once, not obviously, just pressure, like a weather shift you feel in your ears before the storm actually hits. They knew. Someone always knows first. A clerk, a driver, a man with nothing better to do than talk. By afternoon, it was everywhere. Low voices, half glances, conversations that stopped when she passed. She's gone tomorrow. Last day. Didn't think she'd make it through here untouched. That word again. Untouched. They didn't say it like a hope. They said it like a loophole. Because leaving meant she wouldn't be around to complain. Wouldn't be there to stir things up. Wouldn't have time to become a problem. And more importantly, she wouldn't have backup. Their thinking hardened fast after that. You could feel it in the way they stopped pretending. The jokes dropped. The sideways comments turned direct, though still coded enough to deny later. Last nights are always weird, one of them said near the lockers, not looking at her. Transitions mess with people. Another added, almost kindly, better to get things sorted before you move on. She didn't respond. She packed methodically instead, folded what little she'd unpacked, checked her gear twice, kept her movements efficient, contained, no rush, no hesitation, but she felt it now, the sense of being watched, not like prey, but like an object someone didn't want to leave unfinished. The excuse came late in the day, routine enough to pass without comment. A final clearance walkthrough, inventory reconciliation, one last check before she turned in her badge and keys, the kind of task no one questions because everyone's done it before. The location was clean, legitimate, close enough to foot traffic that nothing felt overtly wrong, but tucked just far enough from the main flow to give privacy. Someone said, "Won't take long." Someone else added, "Just dotting I's." She hesitated for exactly one breath. Not because she didn't see it, but because she saw it too late to pretend she hadn't. Walking away now would mean confrontation, noise, questions she didn't have proof to answer yet. And worse, it would confirm what they already believed about her, that she was fragile, that she'd freeze. So she nodded once and walked in. The door shut behind her with a sound that was softer than she expected. No slam, no lock click, just a quiet seal. They thought that meant control. They thought time had cornered her. What they didn't understand was that she had been training her entire life for moments exactly like this. Moments where everything narrowed, where excuses fell away, where intent mattered more than words. As the room settled into stillness, she adjusted her stance, not defensively, not aggressively, just enough to feel the floor beneath her feet. They believed this was her last day, that whatever happened next would stay here. They were right about one thing: she would be gone tomorrow. But what happened in that room? That was going to follow them for a very long time. The room was too quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from respect, the kind that follows certainty, the kind that comes when men believe the outcome's already decided. She counted 4 of them, not positioned like a team, no formation, no choreography, but stationed. Each one close enough to react, far enough not to look obvious. She didn't stop walking. The man who'd asked her to come, who used the gear check as an excuse, was leaning casually against the storage cage, clipboard in one hand, the other resting flat on a bench that didn't belong in that room. "Should only take a second," he said. She nodded once. Neutral. Professional. Hands relaxed at her sides. Another man closed the door behind her. No lock sound. Just the soft mechanical hush of rubber edging sealing the threshold. A third step slightly left. Subtle, but enough to cut off one angle of retreat. None of them smiled. None of them laughed. They weren't performing now. They were activating. The one at the cage gestured to the bench. "Sit down." She didn't move. Didn't speak. The one near the door added, "It's standard protocol. Everyone does it." Still, she didn't respond. Then the third man, he was the biggest, took a slow step forward and dropped the line that removed any doubt. "Take the uniform off." He said it like a procedure, like it was her turn to comply. She met his eyes finally, and it was only then that she realized they weren't looking at her like a person anymore. She was a concept now, a failure they'd agreed to fix. The man near the bench added, quieter now, almost instructional, "This is how women are made ready." The words landed flat, but with weight. They weren't improvising. This was practiced. And suddenly, the mission they'd been building in their heads over days, maybe weeks, was now fully live. The last man closed distance, hands out, not threatening, just moving into guidance position. Like they expected her to freeze. She didn't freeze, but she didn't fight yet either. She let the moment settle. Let them believe the room had become theirs. She listened to the sounds behind the silence. The breath rate of the largest man tightening. The shift of boot rubber against rubberized flooring. The faint creak of the clipboard being set down. She watched the angles, door, wall, vent, cage. Then she did something that made all of them pause. She exhaled, long, controlled, and sat down, right where they told her to. No fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her spine, just obedience. They looked at each other. Something flickered. Victory, confusion, adrenaline. They thought they'd won. They thought she was complying. The biggest one moved first, approached slowly, posture wide. Not talking now, not posturing, just claiming space. When his hands reached for her arms, she didn't flinch. She let him touch her, let him believe, until he tightened his grip. That was his final mistake, because at that point, she had everything she needed. The bench, the leverage, the height differential, the breath in her lungs, the distance between what they thought she was and what she'd always been. She let his hand reach her wrist, let his weight commit forward, and then nothing else in the room mattered. Not the door, not the numbers, not the clipboard, just his body. And the exact right place to break it. The first hand reached for her arm like it had a right. No preamble, no hesitation, just entitlement, wrapped in muscle and confidence. He gripped her wrist tight and pulled, angling her elbow down toward the bench like she was equipment being adjusted. His thumb pressed just above the joint, deliberate, practiced. That told her everything. They'd discussed this. They'd rehearsed it in theory, and now they were executing. Before she could respond, the second man stepped behind her, planted one boot outside her left leg, and pushed his thigh forward, subtle but effective, blocking her from rising cleanly. Just stay still. Not a threat, a correction. A command given to a trainee who didn't know the drill yet. From the corner, the third man's voice came flat and final. This doesn't take long. We're doing you a favor. They weren't touching her sexually. Not yet. They were positioning her, containment first, breaking her stance, the same way you pin someone in a combatives class before the real pressure starts. One wrist restrained, one leg boxed, one breath away from collapse. Most people would have frozen. Most people would have tried to scream, to struggle, to plead. She did none of those things, because none of those things had ever saved anyone in a room like this. Instead, she adjusted her breathing, lowered her shoulders by a hair, let the hand tighten, and then she moved. Fast, not wild, not loud, just precise. Step 1. Her elbow twisted against the grip, not away, but into it, rotating the attacker's forearm into a lock against the bench itself. She used her own weight, leaned forward, and dropped. Crack! The base of her palm straight into his radius. He screamed. His grip collapsed. He fell sideways, cradling his arm like it had been sawed off at the nerve. Step 2. The man behind her reacted instinctively. Too late. He reached for her waist, probably expecting to catch a flailing target. Instead, she rotated low, swept her inside leg across his stance, and rammed her shin into the side of his knee. The pop was clean. He didn't even fall forward. He folded in place, face first into the mat with a groan that ended in a gag. Step 3. The third man charged. No hesitation now, just fury. He moved like a brawler. Wide steps, full weight behind the shoulders. She let him come, let him get close enough to think contact was guaranteed. Then she sidestepped. Not a full evasion, just a pivot, and used his own forward drive to redirect his neck into the lip of the metal bench. He didn't scream. He bounced, then dropped. 3 men, 11 seconds. She stood over them, breathing like she'd just finished yoga. Eyes calm, posture squared, hands relaxed again. She didn't spit, didn't taunt, didn't say a word. They were groaning, crawling. No broken spines, no hospitalizations needed, but none of them would be standing without assistance. That wasn't the point. They weren't meant to be broken. They were meant to be humiliated. She walked to the edge of the mat, grabbed the clipboard they'd used as a prop, and held it like it might still have something worth signing. One of them tried to rise. He got halfway before his leg betrayed him, and he dropped again. She crouched beside him just once and said quietly, "You did this to yourselves." Then she stood, turned, and stepped back to center. 3 men, broken and silenced, surrounded her like punctuation marks on a page they never should have tried to write. There were no threats left to give, only consequences, and they were still arriving. The 3 of them lay scattered across the room like a failed ritual. None of them unconscious, none of them victorious. Every breath they took now was an admission, because there was no covering up what had just happened. No version where they let her win. No edit where this was a misunderstanding. Their bodies told the story now, and their silence confirmed it. She didn't gloat. She didn't pace. She just stood, centered, composed, and terrifyingly calm. One tried to speak, the first one, wrist cradled, ego shredded. "We were just—" She cut him off with a look, nothing more. A glance sharp enough to pin him to the mat. The second man was half sitting, clutching his knee, face pale with the weight of consequences not yet spoken. He tried to shift the story. "It got out of hand. We thought—" She took a step toward him. Not fast, not loud, but absolute. He stopped mid-sentence, like the words had abandoned him. "You thought," she said, the first words she'd spoken since the room turned. "You thought I was weak. You thought being quiet meant soft. You thought virginity was permission." She crouched, just low enough to look him in the eye. "You thought wrong." No one moved. Then, as if summoned by some twisted symmetry of fate, the door clicked open. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a slow, mechanical swing of the hydraulic hinge. And then 2 junior women stepped inside. Standard rotation, probably here for their own gear check. They froze immediately, caught in the stillness. Their eyes swept the room. They saw everything. The clipboard on the floor, the bruises starting to rise, the red-faced men struggling to sit upright. One of the girls, taller, older, started to speak. Should we? No, she said. Her voice was different now, not hard, not cracked, just undeniable. Stay. The girls did. One against the wall, one near the rack. Neither speaking, but both watching. She turned back to the men, slowly, fully. And then she did what none of them expected. She didn't beat them again. She asked them questions. What were you about to do? Silence. What was the plan? Nothing. Then, say it. The man nearest the door cracked first. We were going to... He couldn't finish it. His voice broke. We just wanted to... She waited. He looked down, humiliated beyond recovery. To take it, he whispered. Her first time. She didn't react. Didn't blink. She turned to the next. And you? He hesitated longer, but not forever. We thought she needed to be shown. And you? She faced the third, still nursing his leg. He didn't look up. Correction, he said. Like training. Her head tilted. Correction? He didn't answer. Behind her, one of the women exhaled, sharp, furious, but said nothing. She let the silence stretch until it suffocated. Then she stepped back and said clearly for all four of them to hear, You don't get to be feared anymore. The words landed harder than the strikes ever had. You don't walk around like you're stronger. You don't hold power with your silence. Not after this. She pointed, not at them, at the women. They saw it, then at the room. This space remembers, then finally at the door. You leave when I say you can. And then she stood still, arms folded, feet planted. They didn't move, because in that moment, no one knew what came next. And then they broke. Not with screams, not with pleas, with surrender. The first one dropped to his knees, a slow, embarrassed descent that looked like compliance but felt like confession. The others followed, because they were out of defiance and out of options. She didn't ask them to kneel. She didn't have to. That was the worst part for them. She let them sit there in their silence, heads down, egos gutted, strength redefined, and then she turned to the women by the door. If anyone ever tries to tell you fear is strength, remember this. They nodded, both of them. Then she turned and walked out. No speech, no threat, no dramatics, just command, burned into the air behind her. The three men stayed kneeling, because standing again would have meant believing they still deserved to. She packed with the same discipline she'd arrived with, every fold exact, every strap pulled tight, every item logged in the inventory sheet without pause or error. Not a word was spoken. The three men stayed out of sight. She didn't need to look for them. She could feel it in the hallways, in the weight of silence that had shifted from her shoulders onto theirs. Every footstep she took echoed in a space where they used to laugh, where they used to control the tempo. Not anymore. The same men who once filled door frames and shadowed locker rooms now moved like ghosts, if they moved at all. She caught glimpses, not of confrontation, not of defiance, of avoidance, eyes that darted away the second they met hers, postures stiffening behind corners, a cough behind a door that didn't open again. No apologies, no threats, just distance. At the final checkout desk, the officer on duty barely made eye contact. Sign here, he muttered. She did. Transport leaves at 1800. You'll be met by a driver. She nodded once, turned, and walked away, her bag over her shoulder, papers in her hand, uniform crisp and untouched. Every corridor she crossed felt smaller than before. Every turn reminded her how little space it really took to unmake a myth. And when she reached the final door, the one that led out of that temporary hell into whatever came next, she paused just long enough to let the quiet register. Not for her, for them. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need validation. She needed only this, that they knew exactly why the silence was heavier now, that every time they saw another woman walk through that facility, they'd remember that they would never again be the scariest ones in the room. She opened the door and walked out. No one followed. She never came back, not to visit, not to gloat, not to finish the job. And that was the worst part, because they had been bracing for it. They thought maybe she'd file a report. Maybe she'd call someone. Maybe there'd be some kind of hearing, some reckoning, some outside force they could prepare for or fight, but it never came. No phone call, no investigator, not even a rumor. She was just gone. And in her absence, the unit didn't heal. It rotted. At first, the three of them tried to spin it. She went crazy. She jumped us. She snapped. But no one believed them, because no one had ever seen them rattled before, and now they flinched at door hinges. They looked away when women passed. They spoke softer, laughed less. That wasn't weakness, that was fear. They told each other it was nothing. She'll fade, people move on. But people didn't. They remembered. Other women started walking taller. Conversations stopped being filtered through smirks. The men who'd once filled the room now barely held space in it. They became warnings, not leaders. Not because of what she did, but because of what she didn't have to do. She never filed paperwork. She never made a scene. She just made them remember. They resented her for that. Said she was manipulative. Said she'd used the system. But everyone who mattered had seen the aftermath. They'd seen the men who used to call themselves trainers move like they were afraid of their own shadows. They'd heard the silence after she left and how it was louder than any fight. And the worst part? The three of them still had to wake up in that same room, still had to wear the same uniforms, still had to pretend like they hadn't tried to break someone and been rebuilt around her instead. Because the only thing worse than being overpowered is being forgotten by the one who did it. What happens when discipline is underestimated? When silence is mistaken for fragility? When a group of men convince themselves that initiation is tradition and that someone like her must be corrected before she leaves? She didn't threaten them. She didn't file a report. She didn't need to. All she did was let them show their hand. And then she corrected the correction. Now we want to hear from you. 1. When does initiation become abuse? 2. Who's really in control in a room like that? 3. Do you think silence is strength or surrender? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. If this story hit you, tap like, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what we're uploading tomorrow. And if someone needs to see this, share it. There's another story already on your screen. Click it now. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, brand new upload.